Hello everyone, my name's Dale Orr. I'm farming about 500 acres of organic land down near Strangford, County Down. I have approximately 100 suck cows and 400 clean ewes. We rear all our progeny for beef, and the lambs breeding all our own replacements and sell the lambs as they come ready. We've about 150 acres now of multi-species swards on the farm, roughly about a third of the grazing area. And we're specifically gearing the multi-species towards our sheep. We have two flocks of sheep. One are on white clover perennial ryegrass swards, and the other half of the flock are on multi-species swards. We've noticed the lambs on the multi-species swards grow about 12% faster than the ones on the perennial ryegrass lays, and also they're a lot cleaner as well. We've put this down to the anthelmintic effect of the chicory in the multi-species sward. The multi-species swards have performed better than our perennial ryegrass swards, but really we put that down to they're still fresh swards. You know, our oldest sward is only 4 years old, so really our perennial ryegrass swards would be on the farm a longer time than that. So it's not really a fair comparison. But in terms of yield, we've noticed that the multi-species swards would tend to yield between 12 and 14 tonnes of dry matter over the season per hectare. So it's pretty good, whereas our perennial ryegrass swards would average 8 or 9 tonnes. We would be going in when the swards are quite heavy. The sheep are now on a 5 paddock rotation, so they're in a field for 6 to 7 days. And they're grazing it for that period of time. The sward should be about 3,500 whenever the sheep go in, and they'll be grazing it down to probably about 2,100, 2,200. So there's still 5 or 6 centimetres left, but we don't really mind that because we find that the sward recovers faster if we leave a little more behind. And basically that's it. The swards are managed about 12 ewes to the hectare, and the ewes have still got their lambs on because we've still plenty of grass in this year. The perennial ryegrass swards, our rotation would be about the same length of time, 6 to 7 days, but the sheep would be going into lighter swards, maybe 2,700, and grazing down to about 1,600, whereas the multi-species swards are going into heavier crops, maybe 3,500 and coming out at 2,200. So that's the main difference, I guess. So they're going into heavier swards and they're coming out of heavier swards, but they're on the same length of rotation. In terms of management of the swards, we find in the first year, as the season progresses, the ewes in particular won't eat the grass. They'll specifically eat the herb and the clover, and then they'll leave grass behind. To compensate for this as the season goes on, we generally work a leader follower sister, where we use a group of dry heifers to mop up the ryegrass or the grasses behind as they follow the sheep. Obviously, as we are organic, we don't apply any nitrogen fertilizer, and we don't really need it anyway because the fields have got plenty of white clover and red clover. Our multi-species swards are grazing swards, specifically grazing swards only. If I had to take a cut of silage, I would as part of the management program, but I feel I really don't have to. In terms of nutrient management, basically the amount of grass each field grows is measured throughout the year, and my worst performing fields on the farm will take a soil test in the winter months, and basically that determines how much fertilizer is applied, whether it be phosphate or potash the following season, or maybe some lime as well. But basically it's the soil testing that determines how much fertilizer we use in the following year. My biggest problem on this farm with weeds is thistles. I would have a lot of thistles, especially in the first couple of years of a new reseed. My management technique is top the thistles when they're getting high, when they're near flowering stage. Try to exhaust the thistle, make it exhaust itself. Top it when it's high, and then if it regrows, do the same again. Topping basically is my main technique for dealing with weeds because I'm organic. I don't have such an issue with docks. Thistles again is really my biggest problem. In terms of persistence of the herbs, basically I think it's down to the farmer. I made a lot of mistakes in my first years, And I was in with the topper when the stock were finished the field, and I was topping the field low, cutting it right down to maybe 4 centimetres high, shaving it right down to the earth. And I think that was a big mistake, because I found that the herbs in those fields didn't grow again then the following year, or 2 years they were all gone. Whereas the fields that are left alone and didn't top or topped higher, the herbs generally persist. Another good technique is if you don't graze the field too tight. Obviously the sheep are preferentially grazing the herbs, and if you keep grazing them and keep grazing them, then they will disappear. That's really why a rotation really works well for us. I'm still constantly learning with these multi-species swards. The first few years I was using perennial ryegrass as a companion grass for the herbs and the clovers. Last year I moved away from that to work with cocksfoot, meadowfescue and timothy, primarily down to their deeper rooting capacity. They can suck up the nutrients from lower down, and for us in this part of the world, sucking up water is essential. So we're pretty much building a drought resistant sward. I'm going to continue to experiment in the years ahead. I would like to practice with different herbs, grow different herbs, and see whether they improve animal performance. This is something that I want to try. Also I want to maybe try different companion grasses, maybe not using cocksfoot in another field in the future, try some lucerne with its increased palatability. But it's a constant journey. You're trying new things, trying to find new ways to do things better, and that's what I continue to do. I reckon about a third of my land in multi-species is sufficient. The reason for this is it's primarily just a grazing sward. I can make silage from it, but I really don't like to. I would prefer to take other fields out on the farm for making silage. So about a third of my grazing platform is plenty for me. I don't really intend to grow more multi-species in the future, but I intend to vary the components of the mixes. So I'm going to try different grasses, different herbs in the future, and see how well the animals perform. Well, the first thing I would say to you is leave it till later in the season. The herbs need a soil temperature of at least 10 degrees to germinate. So you want, whenever you sow your multi-species sward, for everything to grow fast, to compete with the weeds. The other thing I would say to someone thinking of doing it is get your field clean before you start. We're organic farmers, so we can't spray obviously, but if you could burn the field off with Roundup or some similar product, kill everything that's there to start with, and get rid of all your weed burden, because once you've established your multi-species sward, because of the sensitivity of the clovers and the herbs to the sprays, you can't use any sprays anyway. So I would suggest get your field right to start with, make sure your pH is right, and then sow your multi-species when the soil temperature is warm.